Second one is still dangerous. Second one's dangerous. This is Piper and his boys. He's got 60 tanks. 42 of them are Tigers. 60 tanks. Plus he's got armored assault vehicles, 2-3s. He's got all kinds of armored weapons. He's got 6,000 crack troops, elite troops. This is Hitler's bodyguard. These guys are very brutal. They're called the Blowtorch Division because what they did when they were in Eastern Front before they came over here, burning every Russian village they came to, killing all Russian prisoners before they captured all soldiers. So they're going through here, and these guys have some success. These guys move pretty fast. By the end of the second day, they're already here, 35 miles down the road. Their objective, they don't have much gas. They have to capture their own gas, which is one of the reasons the Germans lost this battle. They didn't have a lot of gas, and they thought they could capture it, and they couldn't always. So here he comes down here. Show you who we're dealing with. This is SS going through a town called Hansfeld. Their first stop on the way. But anyway, the first stop on the way, this town called Hansfeld, and John over there. And here they captured 19 American soldiers. They lined them up and they shot them one at a time. They killed 18, one got away. Here's a picture of the engineers who were in that town behind the guys, behind the 19. These are in addition. These are guys who were killed and left in the street as they were stripping the boots off the Americans. This is down the road in Malmedy. You've all heard of Malmedy, probably. 100 Americans were captured there, put out in the field, and then they shot them and went around to make sure they did the coup de grace later. So this really got out pretty fast to the American soldiers that, hey, you don't want to get captured by the Germans because look what they do to you. And so for a while, we weren't really taking a lot of SS prisoners either. Here's one of the first towns that Piper came to. It's called Stavelo. John and I stayed there for a couple of days in a B&B. And it was, I just wanted to show you this town to show you what the terrain is like up north. It's cold, snowy, and it's hilly, kind of like western Pennsylvania a little bit. And a lot of valleys, and a lot of bridges and rivers you have to get over with your big tanks. It's not easy. Here's the Americans in the city of Stavelo where they fought the Germans. It's the 30th Infantry Division. We talked about the 1st and the 2nd, 99. Now we're talking about another heroic division, the Old Hickory from North Carolina, the 30th Infantry Division. And they're the ones who stopped Piper, 40 miles down the road, the place called Stonewall, 119th Regiment. Brave guys. They had a motto too. They had actually fought the Panzer divisions in Normandy and at a place called Mortain, where the Germans tried to have a big offensive after D-Day to split our forces, and they were stopped by the 30th Infantry Division, among others. And so they had a motto when they were fighting the Germans out there. They said, "We beat them at Mortain." And they could beat the 1st Panzer again. So we'll find out. Here's a map of Piper's advance. Jerry Dalmiller, our map maker, did this map along with the others in our book. And by the way, can you hear me back there okay? I should have asked that a long time ago. I guess it's okay. All right. So anyway, here's Piper's route. And you can see he gets down here. Stavelo, where he takes it. And he has trouble taking it because of 2 American guys in the road he's going into town on. They have an anti-tank gun. They're 2 American engineers, and they blow up the first tank in his column, and he can't get around that tank because there's narrow cliffs and steep valleys. So anyway, he's looking around. You can see the track. He's doing really well until he gets there, and then he starts looking around for bridges. Back and forth. Every time he gets to a bridge, the American engineers are there first. And just as he gets to the bridge, the American engineers blow that bridge into the river right in front of him. And he says, "Damn the engineers." That's sort of military history of lore about Piper. Damn the engineers. And this is where Ed Gilman and the anti-aircraft artillery shot down the German paratroopers trying to come and help hold those bridges away from the engineers before Piper got there. But the engineers stayed there because the German paratroopers never got there because 116th anti-aircraft unit shot them down. Okay, so you can see he's bouncing around. Down at the bottom down here, there's a place called Chenot. Famous battle where the 82nd Airborne, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, stopped the Germans. They actually got across the bridge with 2 companies of soldiers. They told Piper, "Come on, we found a way we can get our tanks across the bridge. One's open." But the 82nd Airborne by that time had time to get in there and block them and fight them. It was a terrible fight. And the 82nd, two companies were totally wiped out. But they pushed the Germans back across the bridge. So Piper goes on to Stowmont. He goes another route. He said, well, I'll take another route. And he gets to a place called Stowmont, which is on the map earlier, as far as he got. And this is the Stowmont Sanatorium, where they had some fighting. And he got stopped here by the 119th Regiment of the Old Hickory Division. But they had help. They got over here, and they were actually breaking through the 119th, because the 119th didn't have tanks. And Piper had tanks. And it looked like he found a way to break through and get to the Meuse, get to a Meuse River crossing. And the Americans sent out a desperation call to anybody in the area. They said, anybody here, come and help us. You know, we're getting overrun. If Piper gets through, he's at the Meuse. And there was only one group there that didn't have any tanks. They'd been shipped over from Europe, from England, and their tanks hadn't made it yet. They were called the Daredevils, the 740th Tank Battalion. And one of those guys in the thing was Bill Lovely from Helena. He was there, and he and the other guys from the Daredevils went to a warehouse and found broken down tanks, 25 of them, in Spa, where our headquarters division was. And they, one of those tanks was a 9 millimeter, and they got on the road and they beat the Germans here. They joined the 119th, they beat the Germans. Another Montana hero. This is the plaque on the building of Stowmont for the 30th Infantry Division. Another one of those plaques you see everywhere. I always like to see them. Here's a German Tiger tank at the museum there, where Piper, as far as he got. Piper got 35, 40 miles, and then we surrounded him with the 3rd Armored Division, the 82nd Airborne, the 30th Infantry Division, squeezed him in, shelled him to death, and on the night of December 23rd, he got out of there with 800 of his 5,000 men. Finally made it back. They just walked out and left their tanks. They didn't have any gas for them anyway by that time. So that whole northern front now is over. It's over. The blue front. Now we're looking at the middle front, which is the German regular army under a general named Manteuffel. It's the 5th Army. They're basically two prongs. One's going to St. Vith. St. Vith is a major battle. The other one's going to Bastogne. They're starting from the German border. This is the German 5th Army. They have 3 divisions in each prong. And against those 3 divisions, we have 1 division against each of them, basically. Part of a division. Let's take St. Vith. St. Vith, they're supposed to be there on day 2. It's only 12 miles across the German border, across open lands, the Lochheim Gap, over to St. Vith. But it takes them a week. It takes them until the 21st to take St. Vith because of a tenacious American defense by the 7th Armored Division. Another one of those units, these guys didn't do their job of blocking the guys from coming from the north. So down comes the 7th Armored Division to here. And they set up a horseshoe defense here. And then they keep falling back and they set up a goose egg defense here. It's basically, the Germans are like a bouncing ball. They never concentrated their 3 divisions, but they were pretty successful on the second day. They captured 8,000 Americans. Right here, before they got to St. Vith, halfway, a place called Schoenberg. It's one of our great military disasters. They surrounded and captured 8,000 American soldiers. Wiped out the whole 106th Division, basically. But, fortunately, the 7th Army was in there by that, behind them. So there's a number of stops. It's a defense in depth. We stopped them at a place called Brumersburg Heights. Here's where they came through. You can see the terrain's a little bit easier to come through than it was over up north in Stavelot. Here's St. Vith, surrounded by hills. It's a very pretty place. Here's the traffic jams that were taking place at the time, which is why we couldn't get down there to help those guys who were surrounded. This is the village of Schoenberg, where John and I were, where this surrender took place. There were Mel Mellinger and Ken Newton. Ken Newton still lives in Glasgow. We were just there. Everybody was talking about Ken Newton there. And he was one of the guys who was taken prisoner here by the Germans of those 8,000 and marched back to POW camp along with Kurt Vonnegut. So anyway, we have a lot of good stories. This is our guys, prisoners. Here's Permersburg Heights, the first stop after the Germans came across the border. First place we kind of slowed them down. It was a presidential unit citations were given out to some units here for stopping them in the woods for 2 days. 38th Armored Infantry Battalion was very heroic, but they were running low on ammunition. They had a motto that said, for every shot killed, for every shot fired, a corpse must hit the ground. They had to save their ammo. They were heroic there and again back at closer to St. Beth. Let me show you. They get to St. Beth and they basically get back to the river. Up here. So we hold them for a week until December 23rd. Something was supposed to take them 2 days to get over there across the Orth River. It took them a week because they kept like bouncing ball hitting, and we had the 9th Infantry Division, 9th Armored Division, Combat Command B, plus the 7th Armored Division stopping them. So that's another place. I'm not going to belabor St. Beth, but just to show you how we succeeded in drawing them out for a week by setting up these horseshoe defenses. Our tanks would pop out of the woods, shoot the German tanks, scoot back into the woods. It's called shoot and scoot. We had to do that against Tiger tanks or Panther tanks. If you're in a Sherman. We shift to a new part of the battle now. Bastogne. To get to Bastogne, the Germans had to go across the Ore River. This is it. And you can see it's pretty steep, hard to get across. This is what the countryside is like here. Here's one of the cities. It's called Clairvaux. And it's this is another great heroic American stance. It's by the Pennsylvania Division, the 28th, by the 110th Infantry Regiment. And they hold the Germans in this town. And other towns like it. They have company-sized groups all along the hilltops. And the Germans come through. They've got the best units they have, the 26th Volksgrenadiers, Panzer-Lehr, 2nd Panzer. Some really crack units. 3 divisions against this regiment. And regiments, 3,000 men, divisions, 15,000. They didn't have the whole divisions in there, but that gives you an idea what they're up against. There were a lot of times on those hilltops, a company of 300 men taking on a regiment of 3,000 men. And they held them for 2 days. Here's a statue in Clairvaux. It says, you gave us back our freedom. It's from the people of Luxembourg, which Clairvaux is in. It's on the way to Bastogne, remember. They're not getting to Bastogne very fast because these guys are slowing them down. And this is a statue to the American GI that the Luxembourgers put up. It says, you gave us back our freedom. Because they've been occupied since 1940. Here's a group of the Americans that managed to get out of Clairvaux. And everybody was into that battle. I mean, everybody, cooks, clerks, drivers, mechanics, everybody was thrown in with a rifle. These guys were in the woods and trying to find out how to fight the Germans around that village. So anyway, we get to Bastogne. We're getting closer to the end now. But the Germans, after 2 days, on the 18th of December, they finally get to the outskirts of Bastogne. But the 101st Airborne beats them there by about a third of a day. They beat them there. And after the war, our top general there, Troy Middleton, told the defenders of Clairvaux, if you guys hadn't stopped the Germans, the 101st would have never made it to Bastogne. That was ball game. Bastonne's Gettysburg. So, 110th Infantry Regiment, should remember that. They were beat up badly at Hurtgen Forest, and then they also were beat up badly here and practically disintegrated here. But they did the job. So here we are in Bastogne. The blue in the middle, we're there first. We got the town. They're around us. By the 18th, we're there with the 101st Airborne and with the 10th Armored Division, Combat Command B, who deserves a lot of credit because they were there before the 101st all along for a while, and the Germans are coming in at the gates, surrounding us, cutting us off. And you all know the story of Bastogne. I don't have to go into it. They said, they gave us a surrender ultimatum. We said nuts. And then we held out from December 18th to December 26th. If you ever saw Band of Brothers, there's one of their episodes called Crossroads. Bastogne's a crossroads of 7 roads. That's why we all had to have it. And the American 101st captain, Captain Winters, comes into town, and the 101st arrives, and it's chaos there. The Germans are on the edge of town, and some lieutenant drives up to him. He's got the 101st guys on the trucks with him, and some lieutenant from there drives up and says, I hate to tell you guys, The Germans just broke through in the south and you're surrounded. He says, that's okay, Lieutenant, we're paratroopers, we're supposed to be surrounded. That's it. 101st Airborne. But don't forget 10th Armored, Combat Command B, because they weren't around in this battle. They sent their guys out in 3 task forces. They were the first ones there. One went north, one went east, and one went southeast. And they were, all those commanders were wiped out, and those men pretty much. But they really held the Germans, and the 101st came in. There was a guy in the 35th Engineers there too, who was blocking the Germans down south. His name is Donovan. He was John's geometry teacher, and he did really heroic duty there, blocking the Germans in Panzer Lehr Division as they were coming in. There was also another hero named Bob Harrison, John C. Harrison's brother, and he was here. Gordon, the first day, December 18th, and they got overrun. He had a company. They got overrun. That was the first day the Germans were coming into town. But they held them long enough that that they couldn't capture the city. Later they said, the Germans said, if we had captured Warden and those guys in the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, Company I, Bob and those guys had not stopped them, they would have been in Bastogne that day. So anyway, we're seeing great stuff with Lovelady and all these people, Gilman, Harrison, all over with a lot more. I won't have time. Unfortunately, I can't do them all, but they're in our book. Here's when the 101st arrived from France in trucks overnight. They left the night of the 17th, they got there the 18th to Bastogne. And as soon as they got off the trucks, they took off running to the outskirts where the 10th Armored people were trying to hold the Germans. You had a combination of these guys' infantry and the 10th Armored Division's tanks. Plus there was another tank destroyer group there. Here's downtown Bastogne during the war. Here's what it's like in the countryside outside of town. These are also Mr. Gilren's pictures from the papers he had in his collection. This is Bastogne, what it's like. And the sky's cleared on the 23rd. Before everybody says, well, we won more because we had air power. We controlled the skies. But we didn't control the skies until December 23rd for a week. The skies were clouded over, we couldn't do anything. So we won that war without the Air Force for a while. When the skies opened up on the 23rd, that's when things really changed. From that point on, the war was pretty much over. We really tore them up on the ground. And anyway, and also Patton's coming up. And that's a whole separate story. And I can't go into that too much, I don't have the time. But George Patton is coming up from the south, from Luxembourg. And it takes him a while to get there. He doesn't get there until the 26th. But it's a terrible fight. It's a terrible struggle to get there. The Germans had several divisions on the icy hills. And he had to go up mountain roads. This pure ice they were trying to drive the tanks on and into the darkness in the area they didn't know. They didn't know who the enemy was or where they were. And it was some very tough divisions, like the 5th Paratroopers and 79 Post Grenadiers and so forth, Pure Grenadier Brigade. And they really had it was one of the toughest fights. And so Patton he claims a lot of credit for himself, and he deserves a lot of credit because there were some really tough battles on the way. The historians describe it, men were dying in droves on both sides as he was driving up to Bastogne. He had 3 prongs. He had the 80th Infantry on the right, the 26th in the middle, and the 4th Armored on the left. The 4th Armored broke into Bastogne. That's where David Manning was killed from Heijm on that day they broke in. There's also a guy named Ed Swedish who was with the 26th at that time, fighting his way forward, blasting the woods with an anti-aircraft gun and so forth. We have another story. So anyway, I just want to let you know I don't have time to go into Pat, and I can talk to you afterwards if you have any questions.
Tell them who had the prayer for good weather.
Oh yeah, John, Father O'Deal, Carroll College. Remember Patton said he had a prayer. He was tired of being slowed down by the Germans. He went into the chapel. He went to his chaplain. He said, you have to give me a prayer. You have to tell God to give me good weather so I can fight the Germans. And so Father O'Neill sort of said, okay, and he gave Father a prayer, and the skies cleared, the weather got good, and he beat the Germans. And he gave Father O'Neill a Bronze Star. Father O'Neill was from Carroll College. There's also Father Sheehan, who was in Bastogne. If you go into Bastogne, there's a park in Bastogne named, we were just there, in Butte. There's a park for Father Sheehan. Father Sheehan rescued 2 medics down there in Bastogne and got the Silver Star. He joked about saying he was running away at the time, but he wasn't. So this is the story of our guys. This is the story of Battle of the Bulge. The guys go out there, and at this place in Bastogne, for example, we were in a place where the 327th Glider Infantry of the 101st Airborne were in their foxholes. On December 25th was a terrible German attack from the 10th Panzer Grenadiers and 26th Volksgrenadiers and all kinds of units were coming at us. And Hitler wanted Bastogne on Christmas Day as a present, so they all launched a huge attack over on the west side of town, northwest. And they had to get through the 327th Glider, and that's not easy. Those airborne guys. They stayed in their foxholes. They called artillery in on their own positions when the Germans were running over them to hit the tanks. And the Germans go over their foxholes, they jump out of the foxholes, they chase the tanks, they shoot the German infantry off the tanks, and then they blow up the tanks with the bazookas. That's the story of the battles we ran into everywhere we went. If the 110th Division over there on Skyline Drive, over there on those hilltops, their motto was, they were told, they were there, remember I said they held for 2 days in those little hilltops? And they called back and said, we need to drop back at some point or we're going to lose everybody. And the answer came back from the commanding general saying, hold at all costs. And that's what we heard everywhere, hold at all costs. And they did it. They had the guts to hold at all costs. And Colonel Fuller, who was there, said, you mean hold it? You said that we can't come back at all? And the voice came over the phone and said, that's right, nobody comes back. You got it? Yeah. Okay, so now we're down to, I just want to touch on real quickly, the bottom thing I didn't mention, the southern shoulder. And that's where the Germans sent 4 divisions down to block Patton. These green arrows. And Patton broke through those to come up and maybe by the 26th. And his 4th Armored Division lost 1,000 guys in 3 days doing that. Now we come to the sort of the final high water mark of the battle, which is where I sort of concluded, is the Orth River. This is as far as the Germans got. They got in about 30 miles or so. Go back. Right here. Number 8. Manhay, Marche, Celis, Roquefort, and so forth. This is the Orth River. This is the high water mark of the Germans. This is as far as they got. And they got here about December 22nd. Fortunately, we saw them coming. We saw that they'd been breaking through. They bypassed Bastogne. They broke through St. Bib. And they finally got out. They brought a couple SS reserve divisions down. And by the 22nd of December, they had massed 9 divisions along this front. This is their final one. Once they break through the Orth River bridges right here, then they charge to the Meuse just a few miles away. And then they're on their way, hopefully. But we had seen this coming beforehand. Around the 19th, we started bringing in divisions for a secondary reserve line defense on the Orth River to wait for them when they got there. And when they got there, we were ready for them. We had the 2nd Armored Division, 84th Rail Splitters, 2nd Armored, 84th Rail Splitters, 3rd Armored, 517th PIR, 551st PIR, all these parachute units. 509 PI. We had the 75th Infantry, then we had the 82nd Airborne, and so forth. And the Germans had brought in the 9th Panzer, and they brought in the 2nd Panzer over here, right here. And anyway, they had all kinds of great units. The Pierre Glide Brigade. They had nine divisions, including 560th Volunteers. I won't go through them all, but they had really tough divisions over there. But the thing is, it looked like it's an equal fight, 9 against 9. But they were worn out and out of gas and depleted, and we had our artillery there with our proximity fuses. Was our secret weapon. The artillery didn't have to hit the tank; it could just go up at a certain altitude right above the tanks and so forth. And our planes and the British planes were all over the air. They couldn't move their tanks during the day. They could only move at night, and they were out of gas. We heard over the radio net that they were out of gas. They were sending trucks all the way back to Bonn from here to go get gas 4 days each way and come back because Germans weren't sending any gas forward at that point. Our air bombers had bombed the bridges. So anyway, this is their last gasp. This is where we stopped them. This is biggest charge. It's over at this point. We still have to go back and push them back to the border, to the German border. From here, all the way back. And it takes a long time to do that, until the end of January. Some people say first week of February. So we took and pushed them all the way back, and it cost us as many men to push them all the way back as it did during the first part when they drove us back to the Orth River. And that's sort of the summary of the battle. John has a few slides he wants to show this point. Keep this thing.
This is the cemetery at Henry Chappelle up by Aachen. There's, I think, about
Hey,
five.
John, will you get closer to the mic?
Yeah, this is the Henry Chappelle Cemetery up by Aachen, Germany, on the north end. And then there's more Americans that were in the battle buried at the Ardennes Cemetery at Liège. And then there's more buried at the Ham Cemetery in Luxembourg. And the ones that are there are about a third of the original number. The rest were repatriated and buried in their hometowns. There's 77 Montanans in this one cemetery. This is down at Ham, and this is where Patton, he wanted to be buried here with his boys, and so he was down at the southern cemetery. And there's a guy there, Joe Murphy, don't know too much about him, from Bozeman. And we don't have the count on how many from Montana were in that cemetery. There's 22 sets of brothers buried side by side just in that one cemetery where Patton was. I mean, just the incredible cost of this and what that did to families back home. Now, this is an iconic photograph of the Battle of the Bulge. It's a U.S. Army Signal Corps photograph, and if you go to the National Archives and ask for the first photos on the Battle of the Bulge, you'll get this one. That rifle that he's loading is an M1 Garand. It has a rate of fire of about 50 rounds a minute, which is probably double what the 1903 Springfield had in the First World War. Same kind of rifle, same range, and if you're a good rifleman, you can probably kill somebody at 600 or 700 yards, but the effective range is 500 yards, a little bit shorter than the Springfield rifle. Springfields were kept for sniper work during this war and for some of the units. But the important thing that I want to point out is this was the Second World War, and the reason we kept people in position pending that getting resupplied, and then we were surprised and attacked in the middle, is because we didn't want to have a trench war like we had in the First War. We didn't want to get set up and have that god-awful situation again. And I like to think of that as the land of the line. And this war of maneuver, where the man's not even in a ditch, is the land of the plain, right? And this marks a transition in my mind to the land of the sphere, which is where we are now, where instead of talking about a battle line or a battlefield, we're talking about battle space. You can take that to the bank for the last 25 years with the Army War College. And that's what we're dealing with now, the battle space. And the civilianization of the military. Not everybody wears a uniform anymore. Hackers, people that move large amounts of currency around, people that do some of the weird things we see them doing on Facebook, right? This iconic photograph of the Battle of the Bulge, that gentleman there is Sergeant Frank Vukasin. In Black Eagle they call him Vukasin. Well, anyhow, Frank Vukasin got drafted out of the smelter in Great Falls, and he got put into the 83rd Infantry Division, and he ended up in this picture. And then when it was all over with, he went back to Black Eagle. He had learned to play pan when he was a kid. He learned to play pool. And so we were interested in who this guy was, and we had to look him up, and they helped us up in Great Falls. But when he got back, he and his brother Johnny opened up a bar in Black Eagle, and the lady at Borey's up there said, well, there were so many bars around here because all these GIs were coming home and they wanted to go to the bar. So Frankie and Johnny opened up Frankie's and Johnny's, and then they moved up and owned the Shamrock, and then the Miami, and then another one, and were pretty good at playing pool. And then after Frank's wife died, he's one of the few people that can make a living as a gambler. That's what he did for the rest of his life, and he's buried in Highland Cemetery up there by Charlie Russell. And that's who he was. Well, I talk about the battle space, and one of the big things in battle space is the misuse of language, or the use of language as a weaponizing language, or photographs. This photograph was used in the January issue of 2005 American Rifleman by the National Rifle Association in an article on the American weapons at the Battle of the Bulge. Patton considered this a superb weapon. It's one of the 5 most important weapons in the war. And I look at this and I think about where we are now and how people get divided up over issues that were intended to be wedge issues. That's what they're intended to do. They're intended by whoever is trying to accomplish something, whatever it is, to break us up. And it doesn't have to be that way. So this picture, this guy and this weapon, a few steps away from First World War, is now, a useful weapon in battle space. But remember, he's our guy. He was there just like any of us probably would have been given his situation. And we need to acknowledge that there's a new kind of a war going on. And it's hard to get our hands around it, just like it was in 1939. So I wanted to point that out. And then my final picture, this is one of the foxholes for Easy Company from the 101st Airborne Division, Band of Brothers. They're spaced about 20 feet apart, 20 yards apart. And the first thing you notice about them is it's really cold, and you don't want to be there. And but they're all pointed in the same direction, and you can't tell whether there's a Democrat or a Republican in there. And that's all we have to offer. Thank you. We got a few minutes if you want to talk about anything or suggest. We have one lady. Yeah, go ahead.
So, could you speak to the total number of casualties in that particular battle? And if you could you speak for just a moment about anything that you might know about the 501st?
Yeah.
Because my father was in that
Really?
group.
Wow. That was wonderful. Okay, well,
Total casualties in the Battle of the Bulge for Americans was 20,000 killed and 80,000 casualties, wounded and so forth. That meant that this battle went on for 6 weeks. Every day of this battle for 6 weeks, 500 Americans were killed. 2,000 were injured every day for 6 weeks. Casualties. Serious. 501st. Germans, by the way, had the same amount. 20,000 killed, maybe a little bit more, maybe 100,000 casualties. So we had 20,000, 80,000 total. You got wounded. 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment is the one I mentioned with Bob Harrison was in. That they went down in Bastogne, down to the southeast part of the town. They were high, like the 502nd, and like the 506th, and the 327th Fighter, and the 325th Engineers. They were all, it's hard to distinguish who was the best because they were all just wonderful. The 501st got lots of commendations. They got the Presidential Unit Citation, like all the rest of the 101st. They get to wear a little blue ribbon on their uniform on one side away from the others. It means a lot if you have that on your uniform. You come from a great unit. I don't know enough about the 501st except that they were they had the part of the battlefield to depend on here, the 506th up here, 327th over here, the 502nd. So all I don't know. We have a lot of stories from guys. We have a story in our book about a guy named Canola. There's a lot of guys, maybe somebody else here knows, maybe Colonel Reader, somebody else knows about the 501st. I can't give the detail he wants. I just know they were great.
That's fine.
Okay.
they got a great association website. There's a great association website on all the 500 EIRs.
Right? Okay.
And there's a lot of information there. You can just get lost for days in that computer.
Okay.
All right, with the stuff that they put in there. So,
By the way, Colonel Reed has a nice library out there at the Montana Military Museum too, and the displays, exhibits, if you're out there on Thursday, the exhibits are just wonderful for all of us.
My background is in journalism, Associated Press. Of course, AP had war correspondents writing Battle of the Bulge at the time. And the story within the AP that I don't know if it's true or not, is that the reply at Bastogne was not nuts, but that it was a obscenity that the war correspondents looked at and said, no newspaper will ever print that, we've got to come up with something else. And so they came up with nuts and we stayed with that. I'm just wondering if
I've heard variations on that.
uh,
But the thing I also heard was McAuliffe said, well, the first thing that came to his mind, he threw it off on the ground. And so they said, no, you need a response. And so they asked, what came to your mind? And he said that. But whether that came to his mind or something else.
Well, the story we heard, it was nuts, but we don't know. We just heard that the Germans came forward and they were taken to the headquarters and they handed the ultimatum saying, if you don't surrender, we're going to start an artillery barrage, we're going to kill you all, and so forth. And we are surrounded and we have no hope. And McAuliffe was sitting there with General Roberts, who was the 10th Armored Division head there, CCB. And Roberts said, well, why don't you just tell him nuts? And but I don't really know for sure. You could be right, for all I know. I mean, I don't know. They did tell the Germans when the Germans took the answer back. The Germans said, "Can you please explain what you mean by this?" And they said, "Well, that means go to hell," you know. And so the Germans went back to our sentries out there, the 502nd, 327th sentries, of which brought them in, and the sentries treated them kind of roughly too, so you get lost, buster, you know. So the Germans got a rough treatment. The Germans told the sentries, they said, well, we'll be back, we'll take care of you guys. And the 502nd guy, Chappie, said, that's okay, we'll be waiting for you. They weren't afraid. And they had only, you know, at one point the Germans had parts of 5 divisions there. And when this ultimatum came in, and we had, you know, the 101st and half of the 10th Armored against them. The odds were really against us, like 3-1. And but the 101st was never afraid. Troy Middleton made the decision to hold Bastogne. That was important. Right off the bat, he saw 7 roads. We got to have Bastogne. And somebody said, well, that was kind of a risky thing to do. And he said, well, I knew they wouldn't. I've been with the 101st in Normandy. I knew they would never run the 101st out.
Court, you had a question?
My dad was in the 12th Infantry Regiment.
Which?
12th Infantry Regiment, part of the 4th Division.
Yeah.
And he had a couple of history books about the 12th Infantry, and in both in the Hurtgen Forest and in the they didn't call it the Battle of the Bulge in the book, but they talked about battle casualties and non-battle casualties. And my dad always said that, you know, they had bad footwear, and so a lot of sometimes like in the Hurtgen Forest was almost as many non-battle casualties. A lot of it frostbite. Was that a problem in the Battle of the Bulge too, or did that?
Yeah, it was a big problem. We had a lot of non-combat stuff, especially down there in that area was the 4th Infantry Division. Your dad's was in the 12th Infantry Regiment of the 4th Infantry Division.
Right.
And it's on my list of one of those heroic units. They were singled out by Eisenhower after the battle as being under General Barton. The commander of the 12th is Chance, Frank Chance, as you probably know. And they held the Germans. The Germans were coming down. You saw that map where they're coming down the block path. They have 4 divisions coming down. And one was the 212th Volksgrenadiers. And they run into the 4th Infantry Division. The 12th Infantry Regiment did almost all the fighting for them. And they never got more than 5 miles. And it's one of those cases where the 4th, in towns like Dickweiler, Osweiler, Echternach, and so forth, all those little towns, they were in those stone houses like you heard in other places. And the Germans surrounded them. They kept trying to take them for a week. They held out for 5 days in the worst weather of the Bulge. The coldest, the worst weather. And they had terrible frostbite. And they'd go back to the hospitals sometimes. And the General Barton, who said no retrograde movement, he was commander of the 4th Infantry, he meant it. He didn't even let the artillery retreat when they're starting to get overrun. And he would send line guys up in the hospital in the morning. We have a story in our book about that from a guy named McNamee from Butte. And they would line them up. If they could walk, they were going back to the front line. But yeah, the frostbite was terrible. I mean, maybe a third of our casualties down there were frostbite.
When we talked to Ed, he was telling us how the people from the West seem to be able to take care of their feet a little bit better.
Yeah, we had some. Montana. We got some credit for going out there in the winter because no Americans came out and visited in the winter. And they said, well, where are you guys from? I said, Montana. What's wrong? What's the problem?
Yeah.
You know, I had a friend who was in the
506 parachute
Easy
getting
come.
working. He went in ahead of D-Day and then fought all the way through up into the Battle of the Bulge. He said they'd kind of outrun their supply lines and they were short of about everything, you know, and the conditions were horrible. It was the worst winter in 50 years. And he said they got down where they split their ammunition up, they threw it all in a helmet, and each man got 7 rounds. At that point, it was looking really grim, and then 2 things happened. The skies cleared, and Patton came up from Belgium. And but he said it was looking really, really grim for him, you know. He said, then I got out of the service and came home and married my wife, and I learned the true meaning of the word fear.
Well, that's true. They were down at the Great Old Ammunition when those C-47s came over on the December 26th and 23rd, and they dropped all the ammo and the food out. We didn't have any medical supplies. Our doctors, our medical field hospital was overrun on the first day, and our nurses and doctors killed. We had the glider doctors in later on, and the Belgian women took the American soldiers who were wounded into their houses and took care of them because we didn't have any nurses hardly. We had few. So the Belgians were kind of heroic. The Germans killed them crazy too. They killed 137 in Stalingrad. They didn't like the Belgians. But yours is a really good story about Easy Company, which is famous from Band of Brothers. Yeah. They were really low on ammo when those planes finally came over. And there was a guy in town, Justice Leapart here. But Justice Leapart's father was in those C-47s up there throwing the ammo and the food and the parapacks out of the plane. He went around twice. We lost a lot of planes. The Germans were shooting them down like crazy, our C-47s. And he went around twice. And his crew was saying, don't do it, Bill, don't go around again. You know, we went around and dropped those flags down to those Army First guys. Ammunition.
Fred Brower, who ran the smoke jumper program in Missoula, was one of the pilots. And then later on, right after the war ended, he got 3 guys from the 101st in his smoke jumpers. And he was running that program. And one of them was David Navone, who's killed shortly in 49 up at Man Gulch. He's the guy with the Star of David on his monument.
Last chapter in the book, we have a little couple paragraphs on driving around Helena and seeing all the things that remind us of the Bulge. There's like a cloud over this town, like a bright cloud, a nice cloud, that hangs over this town that we have a connection with the Bulge. And the Bulge is just one of them, and all the names we cover up from Helena. Our book's about Montana, but it's really mainly about Helena. And we have a lot of connections with the Bulge. You told them about the plaque we saw on David Manning on the theater down there.
Yeah, you know, Senator Manning and his wife, you know, they donated that theater that they built in that kind of southwestern looking theater in Heisman. They donated to the Treasure County 89ers Museum. Well, the 89ers put a plaque out there on the front of it, said dedicated to David Manning, killed, and they give the exact date of the Battle of the Bulge, which is the day of the breakthrough. So it could have been anyone right behind that last tank that came in. When that tank, that small tank platoon finally made contact, they put 3 rounds into a pillbox that had Germans in it. Then the tank commander stuck his head out and said, "Does anybody out there speak English?" That's how they made contact. Came down to individuals.
But those of you who have family, like we talked here at the 506, the 501st, and so forth, afterwards, if you have a chance, we'd love to get your contact information so we can maybe contact you, because we're trying to add to what we have.
We can at least pass it on to Ray in the museum. You know,
Randy, there's one question.
Okay. Yes.
I'm Chuck Coley. My dad only moved here, Joe Goldie's in the 1990s. He has died, but he fought in the 8th Infantry Regiment in the 3rd Army, and he talked a lot when I was a kid about foot care, and he was really proud he was a platoon leader, and nobody in his platoon had to stop fighting because of their feet, but he was always into boots and the foot care. That's all he'd ever talk about the war. He never talked about anything else. But when he moved here, he met 2 people. One was Colonel Joe Golden,
Yes.
who was his battalion commander at some point, and then another was an Army nurse, Mary Sampson, that died a while back at age 100, and he had been shot through the arm, and she wrapped him up and then told him to wait, but he rejoined his platoon, and then she saw him here in Helena. Like you said, And she told him he was AWOL, and they had a good reunion.
Gold has got a silver star, I think, there.
Yeah, he did.
And we'd like to talk to you too about that, if you don't mind.
There's a Carroll College student, he never talked to me about it, but there's a Carroll College student that got it open up a little bit during a World War II course, and I'll give you a copy of that, that he wrote, and I think the Montana Historical Society has it too.
Yeah, there was a hand up back there.
Yes, I was a little late, but did you guys learn anything about the Germans that learned English and they changed the signs? So I forget what they were called, but that they had these troops that were trained to pretend to be Americans.
That was Scorsese's people. The idea was to infiltrate, but actually when those 112 jumpers went over and most of them got blown off or blown up, they dropped 400 dummies out of those aircraft, and those caused a lot of confusion. People thought the paratroopers were all over back there. But Scorsese's project, he was going to pose as Americans, never really got off the ground, and he finally pulled his people back out and went to the rear. I personally know a guy who was a judge down in Denver, and he told me that he was a platoon leader one night, and 4 of those people tried to come through the lines, and he caught them because he looked at their ID cards and they were perfect. And he looked at his own ID card and it had the N in identification was a flying in because the typist was so bad, and so he realized these guys are fake, and that's how they caught him. But that's about, not too much came of that.
Yeah. My dad was a typist.
Saved the day, right?
They were up near Malmedy, up north. And we had a guy named Speer Elftelund from Cutbank, who was killed and buried in Henry Chappelle Cemetery, who bought Scorsese's guys up there. Cutbank.
Well, we appreciate you folks coming. Randy and I, by the time we got through Great Falls and heard about the old times, the smelters were getting a production award every year for 4 years, cranking out zinc and copper and cadmium for the bottoms of boats, while the younger people were fighting in Europe and in much smaller Great Falls, and they were all homesteaders. They were 60 years old and older in 1940 to 44. And they did this fantastic job, and then they'd buy war bonds, with their money. But anyhow, and then we heard about the planes being ferried over to Fairbanks to get to the Russians, which was huge. So many casualties were caused by the Russians. That really helped us out, and that was huge. And Randy, who was in the Soviet Union for years, and he knows about. They still think very highly of having that Lend-Lease aircraft that were sent 7,300 of them, I think, out of Great Falls with the red stars painted on them. And then we found out that the B-17s were all trained up at the Army airfields in Glasgow and Cutbank and down in Lewistown and then the East Base in Great Falls. But what we found out by accident from a Top Gunner, still alive, over in Livingston, he did a little book about the day in the life of a B-17 crew, and who did what and all that. And it's really quite interesting. But he said that the Norden bombsight, which they were training on here in Montana, was based on, had a secret ingredient in it. And that ingredient was being mined at Springdale, Montana. Who would have thought? Some kind of calcite or something. It's in the book. But little things like that keep coming up. The other thing is, by the time we left Great Falls, which was our 4th stop, we were feeling like those old Confederate war veterans, 155 years old or so, that, you see the pictures of with the canes, that nobody pays any attention to, right? Well, we're kind of that. So we get down to Bozeman, and we have this fired up talk between our audience of 2 people. And one, I think, was kind of Jewish American, and the other one was kind of inclined toward the Bible, and he was telling us that none of this would have happened if we hadn't touched the fruit on the tree and eaten, right? And it was going like that. And the one guy that has the Jewish background says, well, how do you know you weren't there? And he says, you were there. And so we're going on. Randy and I are starting to worry that we're not going to get a chance to talk. But anyhow, after that was over with, it was classic. The one guy, the person who come into Montana from Tennessee, he says, he's about 50 years old. He says to me, just totally serious. He says, now, are you 2 veterans of World War II? Oh my God. So then we go down to the Stockman's Bar and Cafe on Main Street in Livingston, have a nice steak, and we're walking out, and the jukebox is blaring out Ghost Riders in the Sky. Right? It's just great. We both were kids. We both loved that song. And so we went to bed, slept, got our walks in and all that. And at the same time, we both decided that our theme song is Ghost Riders in the Sky.